I'm currently in Dover, a coastal town in England's southeastern county of Kent. Dover is Britain's closest point to continental Europe, with the English Channel protecting Britain from invading forces. The year is 1938, and the threat was coming from out there. A war machine that Hitler and Nazi Germany had been firing up for quite some time. By mid-1939, war with Germany seemed inevitable. Before World War II had begun, the British government drew up large plans to prepare Britain being plunged into war. Some of these plans included mass weapon production, the building of bomb shelters across the country, and the evacuation of children from major cities. But one committee that was initiated is often forgotten about: the National Air Raid Precautions Animal Committee. This advisory body in 1939 drafted up a key piece of advice for all animal owners in Britain. If at all possible, send or take your household animals into the countryside. However, on the eve of war, this committee issued another piece of advice. It encouraged all animal owners to have their beloved pets put down, on the grounds that they would suffer from food shortages, the expected bombing raids, and more atrocities that would soon arrive.
When war was declared by Chamberlain on the 3rd of September 1939, mass panic set in. Understandably, people were terrified for themselves and their families and for their pets, what to do with the dog or the cat. Government advice came via a grey pamphlet which said, if you can, send your cat or dog to the country. If you can't, it really is kindest to have them destroyed. And the pet massacre resulted as a basic misunderstanding that was meant to be advice and not an order. And people just took their pets to be put down in their hundreds and thousands, particularly in West Ham, where the chief municipal vet there, Harold Bywater, wrote an account of what happened when the sirens went off at 10 o'clock that morning. And he talked of people arriving with cats in baskets and dogs on leads. And he said in West Ham alone, there were 60,000 cats and 20,000 dogs. And all those animals were put down. And within the space of a week, 750,000 pets had been put down.
The Pet Massacre of autumn 1939, for it was a massacre, is less well known than other episodes of the war, equally fearsome and terrifying, because it's almost shameful. It was an accident, misinterpretation, the nation responding to government advice, misguided advice as it turned out, but it doesn't fit our post-war understanding and our narrative legend of heroic pilots and Spitfires, of the Blitz, of lovable Cockneys in air raid shelters. It was just too gruesome and sad and embarrassing, and they were just buried in their hundreds of thousands in pits in the East End of London. And there's not any mark of any sort to say they're there, and I think that's wrong.
I think the Pet Massacre is a less well-known event in history because it doesn't fit the narrative of the war. It doesn't fit with Vera Lynn and We'll Meet Again. The idea that the first thing we do when war is declared is grab hold of our animals and kill them is abhorrent to most British people because we're known as a nation of pet lovers. I understand why people did it. I understand that it was a panic and that they thought that was the government advice. And I think it was not the right thing to do because it was an unnecessary thing to do. Because once that week had passed, bombing didn't start, and it was an unnecessary tragedy.
One place that reminds the public of beloved pets that have died during wartime is the old Blue Cross Pet Cemetery in southeast London, just east of Greenwich, near Shooters Hill. I have come here today to meet Liz McDermott, the chairperson of the cemetery, who sheds light on this site, open to the public.
There's been a pet cemetery here on this site since the early 1900s. The oldest stone we have here is dated 1906, which is for a dog, we presume a dog, called Boise. Two events happened in 1897. A local group of Blackheathians set up a branch of Our Dumb Friends League to help with the rehabilitation of sick animals. And also an army veterinary surgeon who lived at Hope Villas, a big house on Shooters Hill Road, set up a kennels behind his house for the housing of servicemen who were away serving in the Boer War from 1899 to 1902. We unfortunately don't have any of the records of the animals and their owners who were buried here, because those were lost in a fire in the Blue Cross records in the 1940s. In 1958, the League of Dumb Friends became known as the Blue Cross, and in 2012, just Blue Cross.
There are several animal graves here of beloved pets that remind us of how our service men and women from the world wars cared for their animals. Those that are buried here have heartfelt inscriptions on the stones that bear testament to this care. The stones no longer stand upright, but now lie flat to the ground in a well-tended garden. Many of these animals received recognition for their service during the wars.
One animal buried here is a dog called Simba. And he was a white English bull terrier and the probable mascot of the 93rd Argyll Sutherland Highlanders Regiment. He served at home in Jamaica, China and India for over 12 years. We don't know why he's buried here. Perhaps his handler, after he was discharged from the army, lived in the south of England and brought Simba down here with him, and that is why he's buried here. Because again of the records that were lost in the fire with the Blue Cross, we do not know if any of the animals here received any recognition for wartime service, but I am sure that Simba would have received recognition from the Argyll Sutherland Highlanders Regiment.
We don't know if any pets who were victims of the pet massacre were actually buried here. But what we do have is a commemoration plaque remembering the pets that were euthanised in 1939. Part of the plaque reads, "More than 2 million died, most of them early in conflict, not as a result of enemy action, but when the despairing owners acted on tragically misguided official advice to have their pets put down." But of course, not everyone went along with this government advice.
Not everyone followed government advice. Lots of people were far, far too attached and regarded animals almost as members of their own family. There was a particularly wonderful woman called Nina, Duchess of Hamilton, who owned a large house in Fern in Wiltshire and who turned an aircraft hangar. She equipped it with central heating and turned it into a haven for dogs and cats from London. The government also tried to get something together by grouping vets and animal charities together, and they formed the National Air Raid Precaution Animals Committee, and they registered pets with little collars, so volunteers from NARPAC went out amongst the streets picking up stray cats and dogs and returning them to owners where they could. And the Pets Volunteering Scheme was aimed at dog owners, asking them if they would like to donate their dog to the government for the duration of the war only, and hopefully to be returned to them afterwards. And lots of people signed up to this scheme, although not all the dogs were accepted.
An appeal was made in the press and in newspapers and on radio for dog owners to donate their dog for the duration of the war, to lend their dog, not to see it and wave it goodbye and never see it again, but to lend their dog to the army, where it would be fed and looked after, and with luck would come home. And many thousands of people did just that. Lend your dog to the army.
Somebody who would come around to assess whether your animal, your dog, was suitable. And they had grades of how they assessed the animals. So dogs with hazel eyes was considered to be the most loyal and trustworthy and trainable, and dogs with black eyes weren't trustworthy. And so they selected some of those dogs, and then the dogs went through a whole scheme. They were taken off to war dog training schools, and the dogs that got to the end of the training were the sort of cream of the crop. And they were the ones that went on to be trained to go on airlists in France and to be used in the army.
So, out of this terrible and sad event that swept the nation, a more positive one emerged. Pets being called up to serve in the British Army. This brings me to the Defence Animal Training Regiment in Melton Mowbray, a Ministry of Defence site where animals are trained to serve in today's army.
At the Canine Training Squadron, they have two main types of military working dogs: detection and protection. Detection dogs carry out vehicle searches, high assurance searches, and high explosive searches, while protection dogs here carry out guard and patrol work. Some of the exercises still carried out today were practiced in the military dog camps that many of the dogs participated in under the volunteering scheme in the 1940s. Just like the dogs in the Second World War, dogs today still go through a considerable amount of training to help them serve in the army and of course fulfill their roles to the best of their ability. Seeing this gives me a really good idea of what soldiers and their dogs went through during the war and the amount of training that must have happened.
Dogs were tasked with the most amazing set of things to do during the war to help. Jumping out of storm boats, jumping out of planes, also the more mundane things of carrying messages and sniffing out mines.
The tragic Pet Massacre of 1939 is an often unknown story that runs parallel with the early events of the Second World War. From this misguided advice, the government acted, and out of this came the Pets Volunteering Army, which in some ways can be a justified action to ensure the victory against Nazi Germany. The creation of the Pets Volunteering Army and new advice from the National Air Raid Precautions Animal Committee allowed pets to serve on both the home front and with the British Army in Europe. Of course, many of these animals didn't come home. Since 1943, animals who serve in the army and deserve recognition are awarded the Dickin Medal. Here at the headquarters for the Defence Animal Training Regiment, they pay tribute to their animals, and in some cases their handlers too, who have been awarded the Dickin Medal and sadly lost their lives while serving. But what cannot be forgotten is that animal involvement in World War II should be acknowledged and the animals given the credit they deserve.
I think it's important to remember the Pet Massacre because animals did an enormous amount for us during the war. Not only the acts of the dogs who went abroad and jumped out of aeroplanes and jumped out of storm boats, but also for the basic comfort we got from the companionship of animals, because there's many, many accounts of people being buried under rubble and dogs and cats sitting by the rubble waiting for their owners to come out. Cats rescued their kittens, and many, many people wrote diaries who said that they were alone with their animals, and if it wasn't for the animal, they would have gone mad. Wives were comforted when their husbands were away at war by having a dog to look after them and their children while their husbands were away. it was a great, great source of comfort to have a pet then. I think that the history of the Pet Massacre should be taught and remain, and more people should know about it, and it should never be forgotten. The animals should never be forgotten, and we will remember them.
It is important to remember the Great Pet Massacre because of the humans' relationship with animals. Yes, we love them, we feed them, we nurture them, but do we respect them? Is it just a show which moves on? When things like this happen, it puts our relationship in the spotlight, and to get rid of them because they're inconvenient is tragic. It's a reflection on the way we are, not the way the animals behave. And to me, as a pet lover, in a soppy sense, I regard it as one of the most awful episodes of an awful war, which ended in victory with millions of human dead. But we should remember the animals as well.